Anybody ever heard of the OODA loop? Anybody know what the OODA loop is? Okay. You know who invented that? John Boyd. Observe, orient, decide, and act. That was John. If you buy this book and you get and reading it it's a fascinating story, but when you get to the end of it, they've published some of the lectures that John used to give to different people in the Pentagon, and literally scared the crap out of them because they didn't know they were afraid they didn't know what he was talking about, or they knew exactly what he's talking about, and it was exactly the opposite of what they were doing. And, you know, all things considered, probably not a good idea. But at the end of it, he wrote about something that took me back to my conversations with Bill Nolte over at CIA about something called analysis and synthesis. I mean, most of you talk about analysis. We analyze a problem. And I'm sure all of you have been to, you know, problem analysis, you know, V1.1 or 101 or whatever you want to call it, where you break a problem down into its smallest pieces and then making it manageable, and then use the observation and control of those pieces to try to come up with a solution. But that's only half of it. The other half is synthesis. And when I read John Boyd's essays, I immediately realized that what he was talking about was music, even though he didn't specifically think about that. Because what do musicians do? What do I do? I mean, I studied classical piano. I started when I was 5 years old. And I grew up in Mexico City, so I played everything from umpa music to rock and roll to classical music to you name it. So every single kind of music that I ever learned or I ever played is reflected in every single thing I do musically, because I analyzed all the music that I'd ever done and ever understood and ever played, broke it down into its smallest components, and re-synthesized it into something brand new. That's what musicians do. That's what athletes do. And I'll throw out a quick plug here for music in the schools and athletics, because I'm sure a few of you have children out there, and you're probably wondering, is anybody in any of our schools teaching our children how to think in a nonlinear fashion? Or is it just Battle of Hastings, 1066, and thank you very much? Is that how we're teaching our kids? When you study music and you study athletics, you are actually learning to think in a nonlinear fashion. Ma'am, what's a basketball player? What does a basketball player do? Puts the ball through a hoop, right. Okay, now that's exactly what his job is. Okay, let's break down the basketball player into what he really does. He's a runner, right? He is a wrestler because he has to fight. He's an artillery officer because he has to constantly come up with the ballistic algorithms to put that ball in a ballistic arc into the hoop. He's a strategist because he has to think on his feet and come up with instant strategies right in the middle of what some people would say combat. Von Clausewitz would certainly argue that that was a form of combat. So how do you do all these things at the same time? It's called nonlinear thinking. It's the ability to think a number of levels and a number of layers at the same time. That's what musicians do as well. Tempo and time. And by the way, tempo and time are not the same, because time is an absolute, tempo is an absolute connected to another word called groove, which can be slightly manipulated. Pitch, syncopation, harmony, counterpoint, lyric. And if you're improvising, you got to think on top of that. That takes some nonlinear thinking too. So one of the first things we need to do is we need to educate our children on how to do this. And I love my kids, and are all great. And yeah, I got a call from my doctor, and that's Dr. Vinny Gumbatz. It's actually a real doctor. About 6 years ago, he said, "Skunk, I got a problem with my daughter." I said, "What's the problem?" "Well, she's texting, and then she's looking at MTV, and then she's on the phone, and she's doing her homework, and she's on the computer, and she's playing a video game on the side." I said, "So what's her grade point average?" She said, B+. I said, "What's your problem?" I mean, all you're doing is you're seeing a generation transform itself into adapting to social media and newer technologies. And they do it seamlessly. That's the good news. The bad news is that the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, when we were looking at how we would how we would describe the kind of candidate that we would want to be an image analyst, what we found was these kids were real good at all this stuff. But what they couldn't do is they couldn't think deep into a problem.